Your Excellencies, distinguished speakers, dear participants, on behalf of the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program and of the WAP Water and Gender Working Group, I would like to welcome you to the launch of this important and timely call for action initiative. Dear audience, I encourage you to use the chat box to write your questions, comments, and expression of interest. Now, let me introduce Mr. Abu Amani, Director of the Division of Water Sciences of UNESCO, who will open the session on behalf of the UNESCO Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, Madame Shamila Naik Budwell. Abu, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Michaela. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends. It is my pleasure to convey this message on behalf of the UNESCO Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, Shamila Naik Budwell. When we think of gender inequalities, we naturally think of education, employment, healthcare, and housing. We rarely think of water. This is a mistake. In this field also, inequalities are both numerous and profound. This is first and foremost due to the number of women involved in collecting water. In 1.6 billion households worldwide, someone must work to collect water. This task is often falls disproportionately on women. Globally, women devote around 200 million hours to this task each day. This means they have 200 million hours here to spend on educating and informing themselves or securing paid employment. In other words, working towards their independence. Secondly, gender inequalities also arise due to water scarcity, which weighs heavily on women's health. Alarmingly, insufficient water and sanitation cause the death of 30,000 million women each year, especially young mothers. Lastly, a third type of inequality is emerging. Today, only 17% of people working in the water sector are women, even though in many countries they are the custodians of ancestral knowledge on water management. We must act against this inequality as well. We must act so that water does not prevent women from exercising their right to education, employment, and health. But we must also act so that women can participate equally in its management. Considering water when thinking about gender equality, this is precisely the goal of the call for action launched by the World Water Assessment Program. In particular, we must collect more data in order to better measure water-related gender issues. The World Water Assessment Program's recent study, published in June, investigates the progress, challenges, and opportunities with respect to these questions. This is a first milestone. The call will help us to implement the public policy recommendations presented in the report, and most importantly, the principle of equal access to water. However, it is also necessary to strengthen international coordination and render it more effective. Our call, issued by a coalition of international and regional organizations, states, universities, NGOs, and civil society, shows that this cooperation is both essential and achievable. With this call, we ultimately want to put an end to a paradox. Although water is indeed a global commons, it is a burden that mainly falls on just one half of humanity. Let's ensure this call is heard around the world so that we can achieve our common objective, promoting equal access to water. I thank you.
Thank you, Abu. Thank you very much. Now we can start the presentation of the call, and if I can have the first slide, please. Excellencies, dear participants, we are very pleased today to launch the call for action to accelerate gender equality in the water sector. Next, please. This fact-based call led by the World Water Assessment Program has been prepared with the Water and Gender Working Group. I would like to recognize the role of the working group consisting of experts from member state institutions, UN agencies, international, regional, non-governmental organizations, academia, UNESCO chairs, and individual specialists. This is the list of the members. Next, please. This call for action would not have been possible without the collaboration of this working group, with a research work that took almost 2 years. Next, please. Why is it so crucial that the water sector be gender sensitive? It has been observed that social cultural construction cause women to have a lower access to water, productive resources, credit, and related knowledge. This directly translates into a number of negative consequences. Less time for income-generating activities, education, and strengthening capacity, a phenomenon called time poverty, weaker social representation, and hence gender disparity in decision-making, leading to a lack of gender considerations in water policies. Next, please. The year 2020 marked the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, as well as the 5 years milestones towards the end of date of the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. However, evidence-based information on the progress to gender equality in the water domain seem too fragmented or not available. In response, WAP did an extensive analysis of the progress made in gender equality in the water domain on a wide range of development aspects with the support of the 50 experts of the Water and Gender Working Group. Next, please. The analysis culminated in a landmark publication showing that progress to achieve the goals established in international declaration and agenda is very slow, and we are far from meeting the agreed goals. Among various issues, we have seen that gender consideration, for instance, including policies, do not always translate into advanced in practices. There is a persistent low participation of women in leadership and in general as professionals in water resources. Adequate funding to implement capacity development activities, data collection, projects and programs related to water and gender is lacking. There is a widespread lack of disaggregated water data by sex, age, job, etc. Based on this finding, WAP and its working group has raised the flag calling for bolder urgent action. Next, please. The ultimate goal of the call for action is to accelerate the achievement of gender equality in the water domain through better data and concrete actions. Next, please. The call aims to highlight the urgent need for accelerating gender equality and women empowerment in the water domain. Call upon decision makers and policy and political leaders, urging them to take concrete actions and break with the current status quo. encourage the development and implementation of gender inclusive transformative reforms. To this end, we have recently created a multi-stakeholder coalition for the call for action, which includes member states, institutions, UN agencies, international and regional organizations, NGO, ODA, private sector, and civil society. So far, the coalition has 25 members, including 8 champion countries that will convey their support today. And in this section of the coalition is open, and we encourage you to join it. I will explain how to do later on. Next, please. The call consists of 3 fundamental pillars. Pillar first is recommendation for action. A position paper recommends specific actions to be addressed by political leaders and decision makers, which include to act upon the principle of gender equal funding without relying on unpaid work for women and girls. Prioritize the collection of sex disaggregated data to assess the impact of actions and eliminate data gaps. Develop gender transformative strategies and policies informed by reliable sex disaggregated water data and supported by adequate funding. Narrow the gap between policy and practice, strengthening regulatory frameworks and conducting comprehensive gender assessment aligned to the human rights to water and sanitation. Foster women's leadership beyond participation by incorporating a gender perspective and facilitating relevant capacity building. Counter negative gender norms, stereotypes, taboos through public interest messages, education, and legislation. Next, please. The second pillar consists of raising awareness and disseminating information. The slide shows the roadmap of the call until 2023. Why 2023? Because 2023 is indeed an important milestone for the call, as it will coincide with the celebration of the International Water Decade midterm evaluation, in which the members of the Coalition for the Call will be able to showcase their advances, new actions, and share experience with other actors. On the way to 2023, the call will be presented at several international and regional events. The World Water Forum in Dakar in March 2022, Dushanbe Conference in June, the Asia Pacific Water Summit in September, and many others. Next, please. Finally, the third pillar, which is the fundamental one. Countries join the coalition for the call and support the initiative through advocacy and implementing concrete actions. Already by the end of this year, 2 major events will be organized by members of the coalition. The Conference of Water on Water and Gender Equality, organized by the Republic of Slovenia during its presidency of the European Council in October, together with UNESCO WAP and with Women for Water Partnership. And the regional launch presentation at the Asia International Water Week in November, organized by the International Center for Water Security and Sustainable Management of the Republic of Korea. Next, please. If you are willing to join the coalition to support the call for action, you can send the expression of interest of your entity to WAP, to us, to the dedicated email address, waterandgendercallforaction@unesco.org. You will find more information on the call on our WAP website, and thank you in advance for your interest. Well, before moving to the second part, we would like to show an artistic video on the value of water and gender equality. The video has been produced for WAP by a group of artists by the name of Group Global Art for Earth. It's an international cultural organization of young actors and performers committed to raising awareness about social and environmental issues. Enjoy the video. Very well. In this second leg of the session, high-level representatives of several member states will convey their message of support to the call for action, with a focus on the opportunity that exists in policy and implementation at international and at national level. A few days ago, we had another twin session on August 23rd to facilitate the audience with different time zones. And also in that previous session, we had the honor to have several UN member states conveying their messages of support to the call. Ms. Silvia Saravia Matus, of the Economic Affairs Officer at ECLAC, the UN Economic Commission for Latin America, will accompany me in the presentation of the distinguished speakers of the panel. UN ECLAC is one of the members of the multi-stakeholder coalition and is also part of the WAP Water and Gender Working Group. Welcome, Silvia, and thank you for co-moderating the session. I'm now honored to give the floor to our first distinguished speaker, His Excellency Borut Pahor, President of Slovenia, representing also the 2021 presidency of the Council of the European Union. Please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to participate at today's high-level event in the framework of the Stockholm World Water Week. In recent years, there has been a significant change in the people's way of thinking of how they should protect their environment, in particular water. Slovenia entered the right to clean drinking water into its constitution, and I, in a close collaboration with my Standing Committee on Climate Policy, pay close attention to water management. Access to drinking water and sanitation facilities is an important goal of sustainable development and a prerequisite for implementing the Paris Agreement. COP26 will be the crucial also in this regard. Through water, we feel the effects of climate change. However, water availability is less and less predictable. Access to drinking water and management of water sources has become a security threat for many environments. By 2040, the global demand for water will exceed the supply by 40%. If water concerns will not be addressed properly, we will face long-term negative implications for development and security. To be more efficient in our efforts, we need to join all our forces and pay more attention to huge gender-based inequalities. In many societies, women and girls are those who collect water. This exposes them to a violence and health hazards and prevents girls to attend school. Women are underrepresented in decision-making in water resource management. Their stronger participation in water diplomacy can have positive effects, as it can contribute to a more comprehensive and sustainable security. The COVID-19 pandemic has further exposed the unequal burden in men and women. It is clear that the reaching SDG 6 without accelerating gender equality will not be possible. To improve the situation, we need to enhance research and knowledge in this domain. I pay tribute to UNESCO's effort in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, I am glad to say that Slovenia will, throughout its presidency of the Council of the EU, devote a special effort to water management and will strive to scale up the EU investments in water and gender equality. A joint approach is vital for building resilience and addresses the overlapping crises we are facing and prevent those in the future. Thank you for your attention.
We express our sincere gratitude to His Excellency Borut Pahor, President of Slovenia, for his support and encouragement to the call for action. I have the pleasure to introduce our next distinguished speaker, Her Excellency Elizabeth Gomez Alcorta, Minister of Women, Genders and Diversity of Argentina.
Autoridades nacionales, representantes de la UNESCO y de otros organismos internacionales, integrantes de organizaciones sociales, estimadas y estimados. En primer lugar, quiero saludarles en mi carácter de Ministra de las Mujeres, Géneros y Diversidad de la República Argentina. También quiero agradecer por invitarme a participar de esta jornada tan relevante que habilita un espacio para formular declaraciones fuertes, potentes y compromisos a favor de la igualdad sustantiva entre los géneros. Declaraciones además bien concretas, relativas a una temática específica y también hay que decir poco explorada en la comunidad internacional como es el abordaje de los asuntos hídricos desde una perspectiva de género, de diversidad y desde los derechos humanos. En segundo término, quiero retomar y ratificar en esta oportunidad la vocación histórica de mi país en materia de cooperación internacional en asuntos hídricos y compartirles un mensaje de apoyo a este llamado global que busca justamente promover la igualdad y el empoderamiento de las mujeres en el ámbito del agua. Esta iniciativa, en definitiva, apunta a posicionar este tema en una agenda compartida y a fortalecer ese compromiso, ¿no? Sobre todo de quienes ocupamos lugares de conducción, de garantizar ni más ni menos el acceso al agua por parte de todas las personas, a la vez que también asegurar una participación significativa de las mujeres en la gestión de los recursos naturales, en especial claramente en la esfera hídrica. La disponibilidad del agua segura y adecuada para los hogares y para el uso comunitario es fundamental para la salud, para el bienestar, pero también para la dignidad de todas las personas. El acceso diferenciado a este recurso está en la base material de las desigualdades sociales. Ya en 1995, en el marco de la Cuarta Conferencia Mundial sobre las Mujeres, celebrada en Beijing, se reconoció que el acceso insuficiente al agua potable y al saneamiento, sobre todo en las zonas rurales y en zonas urbanas pobres, pesa en exceso sobre las mujeres y repercute negativamente en su salud. Así es que una serie de declaraciones y de conferencias en el marco de la comunidad internacional reconoció oficialmente el derecho humano al agua potable y al saneamiento, a la vez que instó a los estados a garantizar el acceso universal y equitativo a este derecho por parte de mujeres y de varones. Desde Beijing han habido sin duda avances notables. Ha habido un importante desarrollo del derecho internacional de los derechos humanos que establecen obligaciones reforzadas en materia de igualdad de género que incluyen pautas concretas para el diseño de acciones positivas para asegurar a las mujeres el efectivo ejercicio de los derechos económicos, sociales, culturales, pero también ambientales. Sin embargo, al día de hoy subsisten sólidos nudos de desigualdad entre los géneros que ponen en evidencia la actualidad de los desafíos planteados en Beijing. Se trata de desigualdades que son estructurales, que afectan todos los ámbitos de la vida y que obstaculizan el goce de derechos por parte de mujeres y diversidades. En relación específicamente con el tema que nos ocupa, el documento de posición que acompaña el llamado a la acción incluye datos contundentes, ¿no? Porque reflejan con claridad las desigualdades de género en el acceso al agua y al saneamiento y dan cuenta también la escasísima participación de las mujeres en el diseño de políticas ambientales y de gestión de los recursos hídricos. Esta realidad, aún con matices, hay que decirlo que es global, ¿no? Y que por eso justamente exige una respuesta contundente, pero a la vez colectiva. Desde Argentina hemos asumido el compromiso de abordar con seriedad este tema. Como ustedes saben, en diciembre del 2019 se creó el primer Ministerio de las Mujeres, Géneros y Diversidad de la Nación, que tiene como mandato diseñar e implementar políticas nacionales en materia de igualdad y de acceso efectivo a derechos de parte de mujeres y LGBTIQ+. Puntualmente desde este ministerio apostamos a transversalizar el enfoque de género en todas las políticas del Estado Nacional, entre ellas claramente también las políticas ambientales. Creamos el Gabinete Nacional para la Transversalización de las Políticas de Género, en el que participan todas las distintas carteras del Poder Ejecutivo Nacional para asegurar la perspectiva de género en las distintas políticas, tales como la obra pública o el presupuesto nacional, para poner dos ejemplos. Asimismo, participamos activamente en el Gabinete Nacional de Cambio Climático, donde construimos herramientas para la inclusión de la perspectiva de género y diversidad en todas las acciones que se impulsan en dicho ámbito. Asimismo, en este ámbito particular, la cuestión del acceso, el cuidado y la gestión del agua es un eje central. Además, trabajamos junto con el Ministerio de Ambiente para identificar esas barreras materiales, legales y simbólicas que impiden a las mujeres y al colectivo LGBTIQ+, acceder a los derechos sociales y ambientales, de modo tal de implementar políticas concretas, pero de alcance territorial, que aporten efectivamente a la igualdad de género en el ejercicio de esos derechos. El desafío es concreto y exige garantizar el derecho humano al agua y al saneamiento en condiciones de igualdad. Esto significa asegurar a las mujeres y diversidades recursos básicos como ser el agua accesible, disponible, asequible para beber, cocinar, pero también para la higiene. Para finalizar, quiero ratificar entonces el compromiso de avanzar en esta línea de trabajo tanto en el ámbito doméstico como en el plano internacional. En este sentido, celebro iniciativas como estas que nos permiten compartir experiencias y sobre todo proyectar en conjunto políticas ambiciosas que nos permitan llevar las reivindicaciones de derechos humanos y de género a las discusiones concretas vinculadas con la distribución y gestión de los recursos naturales. Les agradezco mucho y muchísimas gracias.
Muchas gracias, señora ministra. Deep thanks to Her Excellency Elizabeth Gomez Alcorta, Minister of Women, Genders and Diversity of Argentina, for her strong support to the call for action. And I'm now pleased to welcome Her Excellency Teresa Rivera Rodriguez, Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge of Spain. Let's have the video.
Excellencies, colleagues and friends, it's a great pleasure for me to join you today in this very interesting session on gender impact and what in the context of the World Water Week 2021. I think that it is important to stress that we in Spain fully support the call for action to accelerate gender equality in the water domain. We think that this is a very important issue. Water is key for the well-being of households, for the well-being of our societies, for many economic sectors, for the nature, but it is also something that relates with gender impacts. In many occasions, because it is women who takes care of the access to water. In many other cases, because it is women who is impacted by the excess or the lack of water. I think that there are things that we need to pay attention to. Sometimes it is women who take less responsibility than men in the decision-making process, and this is not fair. We need to facilitate key synergies between SDG 5 and SDG 6. We think that if we really manage these two goals together, it could be very important, very easy to get some improvements on what we experience today. Spain is making strong efforts and commitments to better integrate the gender perspective in many of our policies, but very much in particular in the water domain. Gender equality is one of those cross-cutting issues that we have introduced in the Spanish recovery plan. So to think how the different reforms, how the different investments can facilitate to break this gap, to bridge these two aspects of our day-to-day life. For instance, gender-responsive public procurement. For instance, how we can improve the access to education and trainings where women are much less represented than men. We have tried to introduce the gender cross-cutting perspective also in the National Adaptation Plan. This implies a key gender focus not only on the differential impacts of climate change, interests and needs where women can be underrepresented compared to men. It is also crucial on the role that women can play as change actors, change players. Additionally, we have started to analyze and disaggregate the data on how the gender effect, the gender impact does connect to the different realities. For instance, how many women are in the direction positions in the public and in the private sectors dealing with water management, water planning, water investment in infrastructures, and so on and so on. This has allowed us to identify some relevant gaps in decision-making process, as well as on most of the water confederations' governance. There are many references in the public and private corporates where women are underrepresented. We are committed to further analyze and disseminate this data so that we can improve and we can increase the number of women being part of the solutions and being part of the decisions. At global level, one of the collective commitments made by Spain for the Generation Equality Forum that took place in Paris early this summer is very precisely to promote the integration of the gender approach in water management. We think that the capacity development, the gender indicators are very important to understand how we can improve. This commitment is made in cooperation with UNESCO within the framework of the call for action to accelerate gender equality in the water domain, but also within the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework as a result of the invitation made by UNESCO to Spain so that we can participate and lead a capacity building program on gender and water. This capacity building commitment is made through our cooperation with both the Intergovernmental Hydrological Programme and the World Water Assessment Programme. We are more than happy to collaborate, to share our experience with our colleagues so that we can improve the collective endeavor towards this direction. Making the most of our experience on cooperation in the water domain through the Conference of Ibero-American Water Directors is being a very interesting experience. The UNESCO Toolkit on sex disaggregated water data needs to be improved by the contribution of data coming from all our countries. I want to emphasize that Spain can improve and is willing to do so the gender mainstreaming focus on the sustainable development policies, and much in particular when dealing with water. Flooding, droughts is something that matters to we all, but in many cases, in many opportunities, it impacts in a very unfair manner more on women and girls than on men. And at the same time, when seeing how young ladies, young women access to the educational programs in university on planning, engineering, water management, and what they see later on in their professional lives, we realize to what extent we still need to do much in these fields to ensure that it is a much more balanced approach, not only in the access to the STEM careers, but also in the decision-making process, both in private corporates and in public sector. Therefore, I'm sure that today's session will inspire many other actions and sessions in the time to come. But what it is more important, improvements and changes in the day-to-day life.
Our deep gratitude goes to Her Excellency Teresa Rivera Rodriguez, Minister for the Ecological Transition and the Demographic Challenge, for her important message in support to the call for action, and also for sharing the efforts of Spain towards institutionalizing gender into water policy. It is a pleasure to announce our next distinguished speaker, Her Excellency Kitty van der Heijden, Director General for International Cooperation and Vice Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Netherlands.
Thank you for inviting me to the launch of the Call for Action for Accelerating Gender Equality in the Water Domain. And thank you for the important work you're doing. We're excited to work with you on this issue. And we're looking forward to incorporating the outcomes into the preparations for the UN Water Conference in 2023, which the Netherlands, as you know, will co-host together with Tajikistan. Your paper, Taking Stock, mentions 3 issues that I would like to highlight. First, collecting data on gender and inclusion. Second, decision-making power. And third and finally, financing. Now, first of all, data. The call for action is a plea for collecting more and better data on gender in relation to water issues. But it's not just data. It's about the whole analysis that we do before we design a project or a program. A gender and inclusiveness analysis is mandatory for all water programs funded by the Director General for International Cooperation, otherwise known as DEGIS. It should result in a program objectives and concrete activities which are monitored and then assessed in the final evaluation for learning purposes. But there is scope for improving the quality of the data and therefore the analysis, monitoring and evaluation. And your manual and toolkit are very useful for that. So thank you for developing these tools. The second issue is decision-making power. Despite our efforts to include women, they are still underrepresented in decision-making bodies in the areas of water management and WASH. We need to strive for equal representation, but we also need to strive for an equal opportunity to participate and for women's decision-making power. Now, let me illustrate this with an interesting story from India. A 2017 World Bank study on village democracy in India analyzed word for word who attended meetings, who spoke, and whose words were reacted to. And the researchers found that while women accounted for roughly half of the attendance at meetings, men dominated women by a factor of 2 to 1. Men spoke more often and therefore had twice as much floor time. And officials were more inclined to respond to what men said than to what women said. The interesting thing was that when a woman chaired the meeting, the underrepresentation of women's voices was reduced. Women were more likely to be heard, their interventions were more likely to be amplified and to get a decent response. Now, this shows that sometimes we have to take bold and creative action to break through barriers and to support feminist leaders. And let's not forget young people and indigenous groups who are also often overlooked. Now, for example, the Dutch-funded program Global Alliance for Green and Gender Action, otherwise known as GAGA, works with grassroots women's organizations on climate resilience. It turns the hierarchy upside down by letting grassroots groups decide on the distribution of funds, who gets what amount, and on the plans to be executed during the year. GAGA shows us that it is possible. It challenges us to review our practices. Women's movements are key drivers in addressing gender inequalities. So the OECD monitors the percentage of aid going directly to women's organizations. And ladies and gentlemen, the results are truly shocking. In 2017, only 0.05% of ODA was reaching women and their organizations directly. Not even 1%, not even 1/10%. And this measurement was repeated recently, and the percentage has not increased substantially. The Green Climate Fund has also investigated how much funding was awarded to women. And it turns out that all donors together, foundations, Women's Fund, institutional donors, all of them together allocated 0.1% of total grant funding to activities by women. 0.1%. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we should do much better. Why is this a problem? Well, first of all, receiving funds and therefore the recognition and support that comes with this for their specific experience, traditions, knowledge, ideas on ways to improve decisions on water is empowering for women. It also strengthens women's autonomy. But just as importantly, if women have decision-making power over their funds, their decisions are much more likely to reflect women's needs and ideas. And so there is room for improvement in the water domain. Could it be that our own procedures, our own requirements sometimes hamper women's participation? Should we set quotas, for example, on funding for grassroots women's organizations and organizations of indigenous women who are doing exceptionally important work in water management? For example, small grant funds often reach grassroots women's groups that we do not reach, and the transaction costs don't seem to be that much higher. GAGA is truly an inspiring example. Of all the funds allocated to GAGA, no less than 75% reach grassroots women's organizations. And we can also learn a lot from other feminist funds, like Leading from the South. More than a year ago, before COVID, long time back therefore, we held a roundtable meeting with other donors and private funds on gender, inclusion and the environment. And the focus was really on how to reach grassroots women's groups in water and climate. And we would like to continue sharing experiences on how we increase funding flows to women's organizations in the area of water and how to support feminist leadership. I'm determined to raise the discussion of these issues, data, decision-making power and financing at the UN Water Conference. And I look forward to working with you and with all those women's organizations not yet in this room. We need to enable women to access their rights to water and sanitation and to live in a healthy, clean and safe environment. And all of us together, we can get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Her Excellency Kitty van der Heijden, Director General for International Cooperation of the Netherlands, for your powerful, powerful words of support to the call for action, which will culminate during the UN celebration for the Water Decade, the midterm review in 2023, as the Director General said, whose process will be jointly led by the Netherlands and the Republic of Tajikistan. And now we are honored to welcome Her Excellencies Aide Rodriguez Romero, Vice Minister of Water and Ocean, Ministry of Environment and Energy of Costa Rica. Please.
Muy buenos días. El agua potable y el saneamiento están reconocidos como derechos humanos fundamentales, ya que son indispensables para asegurar el sustento de los hogares y son además básicos para mantener la dignidad de todas las personas. Costa Rica, consciente de ello, ha reconocido en su constitución política el acceso al agua potable como un derecho humano básico e irrenunciable. Además, establece que el agua es un bien de la nación, indispensable para proteger tal derecho humano. Las mujeres y las niñas solemos experimentar desigualdades con regularidad a la hora de disfrutar de los derechos humanos al agua potable y al saneamiento en muchas partes del mundo. Además, pese a que el cambio climático afecta a todos los colectivos de la sociedad, las consecuencias del cambio climático para las mujeres y las niñas son peores. La desigualdad entre géneros es una amenaza para la salud, el bienestar, la subsistencia y la educación de la población femenina. Las mujeres y las niñas están más expuestas al riesgo de enfermedades transmitidas por el agua durante las inundaciones, debido a la falta de agua potable, la interrupción de los servicios y la mayor contaminación de los recursos hídricos. El cambio climático también pone en peligro la subsistencia de las agricultoras, que dependen en gran medida del acceso a las fuentes hídricas para la producción de cultivos y alimentos. Actualmente, las mujeres rurales, indígenas y afrodescendientes desempeñan un rol fundamental en la producción y el abastecimiento de los alimentos en el país. A pesar de los retos diarios, ellas continúan trabajando para atender las demandas alimentarias de sus familias y de sus comunidades. En los países en vías de desarrollo, las mujeres constituyen el 43% de la mano de obra agrícola. En Costa Rica, según datos del último censo agropecuario, se registran 12.598 mujeres productoras, lo que equivale al 15.6% a nivel nacional, mientras que la participación de los hombres como productores es 5 veces mayor a la proporción de las mujeres. Se registra además que solamente el 3% de las mujeres productoras han recibido asistencia técnica agropecuaria. El Informe Mundial de ONU sobre el Desarrollo de los Recursos Hídricos 2020 sobre agua y cambio climático exhorta a incorporar una perspectiva de género en las políticas relacionadas al clima y al agua, donde se asume como indispensable una eficaz gestión y gobernanza de los recursos hídricos para acceder en forma inclusiva y sostenible al agua. En el caso de nuestro país, la Política Hídrica Nacional del 2009 considera el tema de género como uno de los ejes transversales que deben orientar la política hídrica, las estrategias y las acciones gubernamentales. En este eje se incluye el aseguramiento de la integración de las mujeres en las diferentes organizaciones que fomentan el uso racional del agua, la promoción, la creación y el desarrollo de programas y servicios dirigidos a facilitar la participación plena de nosotras las mujeres en la gestión integrada de los recursos hídricos, la gestión de acciones relativas a proyectos productivos con participación de la mujer, el fortalecimiento de compromisos por parte de los sectores sociales para invertir los recursos necesarios para posicionar los planteamientos de género de forma transversal. El Instituto Costarricense de Acueductos y Alcantarillados cuenta actualmente con una política institucional de igualdad de género 2018-2030. Este instrumento plantea el fortalecimiento del liderazgo de las mujeres, el incentivo de su participación en espacios estratégicos y de toma de decisiones, y la igualdad de oportunidades para el fortalecimiento de capacidades, es decir, educación formal y experiencias formativas. La gobernanza del agua desempeña un papel importante en la mejora de la resiliencia climática. Las políticas hídricas que proporcionan un mayor acceso al agua para el uso de todas las personas ayudan a reducir no solo la pobreza y la desigualdad, sino también la vulnerabilidad, aumentando la resiliencia al cambio climático. Estas medidas las fomentamos mediante el Mecanismo Nacional de Gobernanza del Agua, que practica un enfoque inclusivo de la gestión del agua, permitiendo que las voces de los grupos sociales influyan en la agenda y en la toma de decisiones. A pesar de los grandes esfuerzos, nos urge avanzar como país y como región en políticas y acciones para superar las brechas existentes que procuren aumentar y fortalecer la participación de las mujeres en el diseño y en la ejecución de planes de desarrollo local, y la mejora del acceso a los servicios de educación, salud, agua potable y tenencia de la tierra. Además, se requiere promover el empoderamiento económico de las mujeres en las zonas rurales y fomentar el liderazgo y protagonismo en los espacios políticos locales y nacionales. La voluntad política y la determinación son fundamentales para hacer que estas cosas sucedan. La participación y la transparencia son cruciales para garantizar que las acciones avancen en la dirección correcta y contribuyan a los objetivos de inclusión social. Muchísimas gracias.
We deeply thank Her Excellency Aide Rodríguez Romero for her insights from Costa Rica and their advances in the gender policies in the water sector and her important message of support. I now have the pleasure to introduce our last country speaker of this session today, who is with us live. Mrs. Silvia Chavez Cereceda, Director of International Cooperation of Conagua, Mexico. Mrs. Chavez, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, UNESCO World Water Assessment Program, for your invitation to participate in this session. Warm greetings to all those present with whom I have the pleasure of sharing this important space today. During the last 2 decades, the relationship between water and gender has received considerable political attention at the international level. However, we must accept that progress has not yet been made in concrete actions for the recognition of women as a fundamental and crucial part of our sector. We still have some pending issues in the agenda, like having gender-sensitive public water policies and plans that address the gap in access to water, especially for vulnerable groups such as women and girls. Their training to occupy high-level and decision-making positions. The compilation of disaggregated data by sex and the integration of indicators with a gender perspective. And very important also, the necessary allocation of funds to promote all of the above actions. We acknowledge that the World Water Assessment Program's contributions on these issues have been fundamental to advancing gender equality and women empowerment. Given the significant commitments in the global water and environment scenario, such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Human Rights Agenda, it is even more essential to strengthen the actions that the water community has undertaken. Today, we are taking steps towards that goal through this important initiative. Mexico congratulates the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program for such a laudable and necessary effort through the official launch of this call to action and for continuing to promote the gender agenda. Today, I am pleased to inform that my country through the National Water Commission, CONAGUA, has recently joined this initiative, and on behalf of the Director General, Mr. Germán Martínez, I would like to extend a message of support. As the highest national authority responsible for the administration of water resources in Mexico, CONAGUA is currently working under a water policy to close inequality gaps. The National Water Resource Program, our water agenda through 2024, has placed women and girls, especially those living in rural, indigenous, and marginalized communities, as the main target population. For this purpose, CONAGUA modified the operating rules of the federal programs for drinking water and for hydroagricultural infrastructure in order to promote the participation of women in the community decision-making process by giving incentives for federal funding if the community committee leading a local water project is integrated in equal or greater numbers by women in decision-making positions. Our institutional organizational chart has balanced the representation at management levels by increasing the number of women in key and decision-making positions. As an example, I would like to highlight that the coordination of our National Meteorological Service is currently headed by a woman, the first to hold this position. And overall, about 38% of CONAGUA's human resources are women. Actually, in this edition of the World Water Week, for the first time, the representation of CONAGUA in various sessions is in charge of women only. As part of the activities of the Mexican National Committee of the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program led by CONAGUA, a monthly seminar on gender and water is currently being held. And also with the support of the National Association of Water and Sanitation Utilities, ANEAS, we will soon launch the Spanish version of the UNESCO document, Methodology, Indicators, and Toolkit on Water and Gender. We recognize the importance for decision makers to continue their commitment to this initiative, primarily through national water policies, through general awareness of this issue, and through the enhancement of women's capacity in the water field. I take this opportunity to invite the countries that have not yet joined to become part of this multi-stakeholder coalition, to broaden the impact of this call to action. In the light of recent international events, it is even more evident that we need to raise our voices and take actions to support women in all sectors. So I will conclude by restating the need to make bolder efforts in the water sector to ensure access without discrimination, to promote women's leadership in management and governance, and to counteract the stereotypes that disadvantage women and girls. It has been said, and it is ever so true, that gender injustice is equal to environmental justice, and that the reflection of women in water is a reflection of our societies. It is urgent to take actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Chavez, for your powerful message. Thank you as well to all our distinguished speakers. It is now time to close this session. So, Michaela, I hand over to you.
Thank you, Sylvia. Thank you. It is time to close, and thank you very much. And really, I share our deep gratitude to all the high level representative of the member states for their intervention and the strong support to the Call for Action initiative. With also thanks the audience for the attention and call on everyone to turn words into actions. We are convinced that this call for actions represents an invaluable opportunity to get on track with the ultimate deadline in 2030. And we encourage you to join, support, and be engaged. As I said before, if you wish to do so, if you wish to join us, please contact UNESCO WAP using the dedicated email for the call for action, water and gender call for action @unesco.org. I wish everyone a pleasant participation in the World Water Week and encourage you to accompany us in our WAP agenda during the last part of the week. Thank you, and continue to put your comments in the chat box. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.